The first shot was not meant to kill. It was a message, fired through the living room window of a modest suburban home, shattering the illusion of safety and signaling that in this new order, no one was beyond reach. For Anatoly Volkov, a man whose life had been a testament to quiet principle, the splintered glass on his carpet was the opening argument in a trial he never agreed to attend. He was a historian, a man more comfortable in the dust of archives than the dust of battle. But in a regime that saw the past as a threat to be rewritten, a historian was the most dangerous political opponent of all. Anatoly and S. life before the rise of the so-called Vanguard Party was one of academic reverence. Colleagues at the university remembered a man with kind eyes set deep in a face etched by constant, thoughtful concern, his tweed jackets perpetually smudged with chalk dust. His wife, Lena, a botanist with a laugh that could quiet a room, had filled their home with the scent of rosemary and old books. Their daughter, Mila, was the center of their universe, a bright girl of 16 who saw her father not as a dissident, but as a storyteller, a keeper of forgotten truths. He wasn't an activist waving a banner. His opposition was quieter, more profound. In his seminal work, The Fictions of Power, he had meticulously documented how autocrats throughout history manipulated language and memory to consolidate control. It was a scholarly text, but in the current climate, it read like a blueprint for resistance. When the new Minister of Cultural Purity, a chillingly efficient man named Igor Vostok, demanded public universities remove subversive texts from their curricula, Anatoly was the only tenured professor who refused. His statement was simple, delivered not to a camera, but to his faculty dean. A nation that erases its history has no future worth building. The investigation into the shooting was a masterpiece of bureaucratic farce. 2 inspectors arrived, their faces blank, their questions perfunctory. They took photographs of the broken window, nodded as Lena, her hands trembling, described the roar of the engine, the single, precise gunshot. They filed their report, classifying it as probable vandalism by disaffected youths. There was no ballistics analysis, no canvassing of neighbors for witnesses. The case was closed before the glass was swept up. This was the first twist, the subtle tightening of the noose. The regime wasn't hiding its involvement. It was demonstrating its impunity. A week later, Anatoly was summoned, not to a police station, but to the monolithic Ministry of State Security. The room was windowless, the air stale. The man across the metal table was Igor Vostok himself, his smile a thin, bloodless line. "Professor Volkov," Vostok began, his voice a soft, reasonable drone. "A troubling incident at your home. It seems the new patriotic fervor of our youth can sometimes be misdirected. A public statement of support for the government as educational reforms would do much to calm such fervent spirits. It would be a shame if your family became collateral in a cultural misunderstanding." Anatoly said nothing, his silence a louder refusal than any shout. He left knowing the rules of the game had been set. His principles were the bait, and his family's safety was the trap. For a few months, a tense quiet descended. Anatoly was dismissed from the university for gross insubordination. He took a job as a night watchman at a warehouse, the long, dark hours a stark contrast to his life of the mind. He and Lena spoke in hushed tones after Mila was asleep, their conversation circling the same unanswerable question. How far would they go? The answer came on a rain-slicked Tuesday in November. Mila was walking home from a friend's house, her route taking her through a small, ill-lit park. A black sedan with no license plates pulled to the curb. 2 men in long coats emerged. There was no struggle, no scream that anyone would later admit to hearing. She was simply gone. When Anatoly received the call, the world shrank to the cold plastic of the receiver pressed against his ear. The voice on the other end was distorted, mechanized. "Your historical revisions are required. The first draft is overdue." The line went dead. The investigation into Mila's disappearance was, if possible, even more hollow than the one into the shooting. The police treated it as a runaway case, suggesting a teenage girl's rebellion. They offered platitudes and closed doors. This was Anatoly's breaking point, the moment the intellectual became the insurgent. The quiet historian was gone, replaced by a man burning with a cold, focused fury. He began to speak, not in scholarly journals but on clandestine radio broadcasts. His voice, once reserved for lecture halls, now crackling through the static into 1,000 hidden apartments. He named names. He detailed Vostok's rise, his purges, his corruption. He spoke of his daughter, turning his personal tragedy into a public indictment. The stakes were no longer about his career or even his safety. They were about the soul of a nation and the life of his child. The regime, which had relied on quiet intimidation, now had a vocal, sympathetic martyr in the making. They had to silence him, but they needed to do it in a way that would not create a ghost to haunt them. They needed a confession, a spectacle. They needed to break him utterly and publicly. The key evidence was delivered to Anatoly's doorstep in a plain cardboard box. Inside, nestled in white packing foam, was Mila's favorite hair ribbon, the blue one with little white daisies. Wrapped around it was a single sheet of paper. "The next draft," the note read, "will be written in your own hand. A full confession of your treasonous lies and your plans to destabilize the state. Read it on the national broadcast at 8 p.m. tomorrow. Do this, and your historian's work on the past will be over. Your daughter will have a future." It was an impossible choice: betray the truth he had dedicated his life to, and save his child, or hold fast to his principles and condemn her. That night, Anatoly Volkov sat at his kitchen table, the ribbon clutched in his hand, and wrote. He wrote a confession so detailed, so damning, that it would leave no doubt of his guilt. He admitted to fabricating historical documents, to being in the pay of foreign intelligence, to orchestrating a plot to plunge the country into chaos. He signed his name with a flourish. He would give them their confession. But he had one last revision to make. The broadcast was held in the grand hall of the Ministry of Information, a cavernous space of marble and gold leaf packed with a hand-picked audience of party loyalists. Cameras whirred. Igor Vostok stood at a podium, his face a mask of somber triumph. "Today," he intoned, "the poison of deceit is drawn from the body politic. Today, you will hear the truth from the traitor's own lips." Anatoly was led onto the stage. He looked gaunt, aged a decade in a week, his hands cuffed in front of him. But his eyes, when they found the camera lens, held a terrifying clarity. He was handed his confession. The room fell silent, waiting for the final, humiliating surrender. Anatoly looked down at the pages, then back up at the camera, directly into a million homes. He took a deep, shuddering breath, and then he smiled, a small, sad, defiant smile. "Everything I am about to read," he said, his voice steady and clear, "is a lie, dictated by the man standing behind me, Igor Vostok." A gasp rippled through the hall. Vostok's smile vanished. Guards shifted uneasily. Anatoly continued, his voice gaining strength. "They have my daughter. They shot through my window. They threaten, they kidnap, they torture, and they call me the criminal. This document is not my confession. It is theirs." He began to read, but he did not read the words he had written. He had memorized a different text entirely. He recited names, dates, and bank account numbers. He detailed the secret prisons, the embezzled state funds, the orders Vostok had given for his own family's intimidation. He was using their platform, their moment of victory, to put the entire regime on trial. It was an act of breathtaking, suicidal courage. The broadcast feed was cut within 30 seconds, but it was too late. The clip, the image of a broken man finding one last reservoir of unbreakable strength, was already spreading through the digital underground like wildfire. The courtroom drama that followed was a foregone conclusion, yet it was packed with international observers. Anatoly was charged with high treason, sedition, and a dozen other fabricated crimes. He offered no defense, instead using the stand as his final pulpit. When the judge, a stooge of the regime, asked if he had any final words before sentencing, Anatoly stood, turned to the gallery, and found Lena's tear-streaked face. "Tell Mila I kept my promise," he said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Tell her that some stories are worth any price." He was sentenced to death by public execution, a sentence designed to be the final, terrifying period at the end of his story. Dawn broke gray and cold over the central square. A crowd, larger than the authorities had anticipated, stood in silent, shivering clusters before a hastily constructed wooden platform. When Anatoly was led out, he was not broken. He walked with a dignity that seemed to infuriate the masked guards. He was made to kneel. The firing squad, their faces obscured, took their positions. The officer in charge read the sentence in a loud, monotonous voice. In that final, suspended moment before the command was given, a single, clear voice rang out from the back of the crowd. It was a young woman's voice, raw with emotion, shouting one word: "Father!" It was Mila. She had been released, a final, cruel twist from Vostok, to ensure Anatoly knew she was safe just as he was murdered. Anatoly's head lifted, his eyes searching the crowd, and in that instant, a look of profound, unutterable peace washed over his face. The order was barked. The shots echoed, sharp and final, across the square. But the regime had miscalculated. They had intended the execution to be a lesson in fear. But in his defiant death, Anatoly Volkov had given them something far more dangerous: a legend. The historian had written his final, most powerful chapter not in a book, but in the memory of a people, proving that while a regime can kill a man, it cannot execute the truth he died to tell. In the end, the most dangerous weapon against tyranny is not a bullet, but a memory that refuses to die.